Campbell Newman, how are you, mate?
G'day, Chris. Thanks for having me, mate. Great to be with you.
Mate, it's a pleasure. So for the people listening, do you want to just sort of give them a rundown as to what you're doing at the moment? You swap parties, why you swap parties, and what your vision is moving forward. Summarize it. I'm sure we could talk about that for an hour, but mate, just an introduction.
Sure. Well, look, people would know me as a former mayor of Brisbane and also Premier of Queensland. I was a member of the Liberal National Party, involved with them for many, many years, but I left in disgust around about August last year, and I joined the Liberal Democrats, who are a libertarian party. So I just really want to stress that I'm not with the LNP. I'm not a member of the Liberal Party. I'm a member of the Liberal Democrats, who I'd put to you today in your view is that they're the true liberals. So libertarians, what are they for? Well, they want government out of our lives. Okay, so we're about, when it comes to financial management of government, we want to spend the taxpayers' dollar wisely, carefully, because it's come out of the hide of mums and dads and ordinary people. We want low debt, we want balanced budgets, low debt. We want low taxes, and we want government out of our lives. And when it comes to social policy, it's rule 11, let live. We don't want to tell, I shouldn't be telling you how to live your life. I don't want you to tell me how to live my life in terms of, sexuality or things like voluntary assisted dying and the like. And, some people might not know, but I backed gay marriage years before anybody, of high profile in politics was prepared to do it. I backed gay marriage back in 2011 when I was leader of the opposition in Queensland. So that's what we stand for. And we've got some great policies that we could talk about today.
Absolutely. So you're Premier of Queensland. What years were you Premier there?
Look, I was Lord Mayor of Brisbane from 2004 to 2011, and I resigned then after sort of getting the big tunnel projects going and delivering some of those and new bridges and buses and the like. And then from 2012 to 2015, I was Premier of Queensland until I got hosed out the door at the end of January 2015. So I've been in business since. So I've been involved in technology startups. I've been involved in Sky News on a contract with them, but my main thing is funds management. So basically we help people invest in property. And I've got a great business. I've got great business partners. I really enjoy it. And I want to say this as well up front today. The idea of going back into politics, standing for the Senate in Queensland, is something I'm doing because I want to serve the community. I'm so disgusted in the Labor Party, the Liberal Party, the Liberal National Party, the Greens. I'm absolutely over the way they've, stuffed this country up in the last 2 years. And I just had to take a stand. I just couldn't stand by any longer while, Australia was burnt to the ground and families were set against families and friends against friends and the country being ripped apart. So that's why I'm doing it. And, I just say to viewers, please, give me a go here. You might have a view about me from the past, but I really want to get in there into the federal parliament, shake things up and serve you and your family.
Yeah, mate, and we need that. I think, the amount of division that's been brought upon in the past 2 years, it's incredible. And over something that you would never think prior to this, that there'd be so much division over someone's vaccination status. It's bizarre that so many people seem to take it personally. You've got one side who are, it seems like you have to pick sides because you've got one side that's pro-vax and you'd think they're getting paid by pharmaceutical companies the way they attack anybody that thinks, and then you've got the other side where they're sort of hardcore, I'm not going to use the term anti-vaxxers because I don't think it's appropriate in this particular case. I'm sure some people who don't want to get this vaccine are anti-vaxxers, but a lot of people, they're not anti-vaxxers. They just don't want this particular one. And the division it's caused is almost like you're pushed into a corner as to what side you want to pick. And that's being fueled by the government, first and foremost, and then by the media, which is typical of a lot of issues. This isn't the first time it's happened. But we need someone to bring that balance back. And to remind everyone that first and foremost, we're Australians. Rule one, that's the most important thing. And we need to stand together and unite as one. We're on our own little island at the bottom of the world. We need to stand together. And at the moment, the country is just divided in two, and it's a shame. It's a real shame. I'm proud of this country, and I'm very grateful to be born here. But it's disappointing to me to see the way the country's going. It takes a little bit of pride out of it.
Well, I'm really quite shocked, Chris, about what's happened. And if you told me 2.5 years ago we'd see a pregnant woman being dragged out of her home by the Victorian police, I'd have said that had never happened, for trying to organise, a protest. If you told me that people would be belted up by the police in Victoria, or subjected to baton rounds and sort of pepper spray, etc., having a protest, I'd have said you're crazy. I'd have said, Australia is into free speech and the right to protest and the like. I mean, when I was Premier, people were protesting against things that my government was doing. We could talk about that, by the way, if you wanted to. But we didn't resort to those sort of tactics, and yet supposedly this is to protect people. So we're hurting people to protect them. It's just complete rubbish. So I guess, mate, the best way to probably talk about the position on this is a thing called the Freedom Manifesto, which is the policy of the Liberal Democrat Party, the LibDems, and you can find it on ldp.org.au, Freedom. And basically, when it comes to COVID, we've said this is an overreaction. It is a massive overreaction, and it is a whole lot of fear-mongering by politicians, aided and abetted by the mainstream media, who really should have known better. And
so let me just quickly ask a question. Sorry, back to that. Yep. It is an overreaction. Now,
it is an overreaction, mate.
Do you think it's intentional?
I think in a way it is, but it's in some ways it's also unconscious. But it's like the politicians, if you deal with them first, they've dug themselves a hole so deep they can't get out of. Because if they admitted tomorrow that they've got this actually quite wrong, they lost all perspective, they completely lost the proverbial, they're going to look really, really bad. And the media are in the same boat in a way, but for the media as well, they just love to continue to talk about this. I mean, most of the people I mix with now, just when there's stuff, the stats come on, and then there's so many cases today and whatever, and all these stats. I mean, they just go, for God's sake, people let it go. We didn't report breathlessly the number of flu cases in this country, back in 2019. No, who would have given a rat's ass, mate, if I can put it
exactly
like
right.
that. So what we're saying in the Lib Dems is, and we said this about September last year, back then we said it needed to happen by December, by Christmas. I'm talking in the past tense. We said that the vaccine mandate was terribly wrong. I know you want to talk about that. Terribly wrong. It shouldn't be happening. There should be no check-in apps. There should be no requirement for masks unless you as an individual want to do it. Everybody who wanted a vaccine should have the opportunity to get one, but there should be no coercion. It's a personal choice. The borders between the states should be open, and the international border should be open. We just get on with life. That's what we've been saying for a long time. We're saying today. And we're just getting there inch by inch as the politicians sort of see the polls changing. And so they're changing their perspective, they're changing their line. It was interesting when Perrottet in New South Wales, who's the best of the bad bunch, when he started to open up before Christmas, Daniel Andrews suddenly turned on a dime, and next minute he's opening up. So, look, it's incredibly poll driven by the politicians, and it's about the political science, not about the medical science. Sadly, by the way, the doctors are being coerced too. Many doctors are very fearful to speak out and speak to the real issues here. Look, bottom line is COVID is a bad bug, but the Omicron variant is not nearly as dangerous as the early variants. We're all going to be exposed to it, probably going to get it. Most people are going to be A-OK. Sadly, those who are elderly could die of it, and that's why they're the ones who need to be protected. And the people who've got medical conditions, they need to be protected and take steps themselves, personal responsibility to look after themselves. So that's our position. And we need to open up and let the people in the hospitality sector, the restaurants, the cafes, the people in the music industry who've suffered so terribly, the tourism, the broader tourism sector, the people who run adventure tours and the like, all that, they have suffered so much, and it's time to let those people particularly get on with their lives. They've got every right to live as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they're still struggling. And I know in some places where they've opened up, like I've seen some footage from somewhere in Brisbane, and it was like a ghost town.
Yeah.
And the same thing in Victoria. Like when you look at the footage through the main streets of Melbourne, it's almost looks deserted in some parts because businesses are closed and everything's up for lease, and it's, you know, it's extremely disappointing. And I feel
Well,
for
you've
those
got
families.
idiot politicians who back 2 years ago were saying, oh, business would go into hibernation. You know, Frydenberg, the federal treasurer, you know, was saying that for a while. I mean, how idiotic.
Yeah.
You know, and that's by the way, that's the trouble with our politicians. None of them really understand what it really takes to actually set up a business, run a business, take responsibility to employ people, because they're all a bunch of political hacks, and we're seeing that. And just to be clear again, I'm really over all of them. I'm over the Liberal Party and their brand of political hack, and I'm over the Labor Party and their hacks. And as for the Greens, well, they're particularly left wing and dangerous in their views and what they would do. Yeah.
But we're seeing that, and I'm sure you've heard the news over the past few weeks, is that they're going after Joe Rogan, something fierce. I feel for the guy. He's being attacked from every angle, and that's the problem as well, which is causing a lot of this. And we've seen this from the beginning. As to, for example, if I was to say something on social media, which could be true, and most of what I've said is true, and if there's ever something that I've said that turned out to be false, or you know, I'll always accept that and apologize and remove it or whatever it may be. But I've never intentionally said the wrong thing to persuade anybody to. You don't need to do that. But if you or I wanted to say something, let's say, for example, which I've been pulled up on it many times by different social media platforms, that how important vitamin D is in terms of severity of illness. It was removed for misinformation, and you get people saying that, you know, you're not a doctor, you can't speak about that. But yet when other people, politicians, you even get influencers on social media that talk about getting vaccinated. Well, who are they? If I'm not a doctor, they're certainly not a doctor either. So it's strange how there's this narrative that's being pushed by the mainstream media, by the tech giants, by the government. And you can say whatever you want to say. It doesn't matter your qualifications, that's irrelevant, so long as it's in line with that narrative.
Yeah.
When you speak against the narrative, or you say something that doesn't really line up with that, you're criticized. Your posts are removed. I know many people, good people, have had their accounts completely banned, deleted. And it seems to me that these people that are not just the government and politicians, but also the health officials, the doctors, they get up and speak at the press conferences. They're not stupid people. They're not idiots. They're intelligent people. Not all of them, but some of them are intelligent. And you think, how are you believing this? Like if my year 8, year 9 education level can see this for what it is, then surely you can see that something doesn't add up. But it's like they're trapped in the narrative. And and I make that point on one of the last podcasts I did, that you have a lot of good people that are stuck on the wrong side, who may want to say something, who may want to speak out, but they can't because they're trapped. They'll lose their jobs. They'll get criticized publicly, humiliated by the media. So they just keep their mouths closed and continue to go along with it. I feel like that's happening a lot. Even with some politicians, I feel like that's happening.
Look, it sure is, mate. And it is, you know, using a word to describe what you said, it is a case of groupthink, where they have, you know, I said earlier, they've dug themselves a hole. They can't get out of it. And it sort of perpetuates. But yeah, look, I got to say, over the last 2 years, I mean, and particularly I've been on Sky News Australia talking about this stuff, so I'm well and truly on the public record. I just didn't jump on the bandwagon here. You know, like if we go back, say, to April 2020, almost 2 years ago, you know, we had a situation then when the then health officer in Queensland, Jeanette Young, who's now the governor, she wouldn't approve a 4-plane overflight on Anzac Day. So just, I don't know if you recall that, but so 4 aeroplanes, 4 separate aeroplanes, 4 separate pilots couldn't fly over the Gold Coast and Brisbane to commemorate, you know, our war dead and the people have made that sacrifice to the country. But then she waved through a funeral for an Indigenous group, family in Mackay. And, you know, you've got, the first one's illogical. but then you've got the overlay of that with the inconsistency. And time again, we've seen, supposedly science served up, which is illogical, inconsistent, arbitrary, downright stupid, at times callous, uncaring. People who've given birth to babies, they then can't, a lady's given birth to a baby, you then can't nurse her baby. She's essentially removed because of COVID risks at the time in the hospital system in Queensland. People who couldn't get across the border, get back to their homes, who were forced to camp in their cars or caravans, at Mooloolaba, and they were Queenslanders. They were trapped out for 3 or 4 months. They couldn't get back. I mean, it's just been so wrong, mate. And, for then the media, who normally in normal times would have jumped up and down, it would have been on a current affair. The Premier of the day would have been, hauled over the coals and castigated for being cruel. Free pass. It's like, it's like the special card of Monopoly. You can do what you damn well want.
Yeah.
So it has been crazy. And, it's good though that people, there are people out there who've woken up and who are pushing back. And frankly, we've all got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Enough. I mean, look, I was walking before coming on your show today. I was walking down Queen Street. I had to do some business in town to go and see the accountants and whatever. And you walk down Queen Street and there is no requirement to wear a mask out in the open air. But I would say that about 80% of people are wearing masks. What for?
Fear.
What? Yeah, fear. Fear. And it's not just, and I think and the worst thing, I don't think it's fear of getting Omicron. I think it's fear of just someone going, why aren't you wearing a mask?
Well, I think it's fear that's driven by.
Well, I can tell you, mate, I wasn't.
Yeah, good man.
Okay.
It's nonsense like this. It's fear. And that's been, it's spread by the government and pushed into everyone's lives by the media, where you can't escape it. It's everywhere. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they when you're in, look, it's hard to explain, I guess, until you're in the situation, but we all know what it's like. If you're in, just say someone storms into your home with a gun, right? Your ability to think at that point is limited because you're in a state, you're in fear, you're in shock. And a lot of these people that get their news, majority of their news from mainstream media outlets, are in that same state where they're so scared of this thing, where they truly believe if they get it, they're going to die. And reality, that only applies to 1% or 2% of the population. High 90% of the population don't even need to think that way. Just think, I'll get it. I'll either won't know I've got it, or I might have a bit of a flu, but that's it. But people are thinking, I'll get it. I wonder if I die. That's their way of thinking. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of those people wearing masks are doing it for that reason. But as you said, also because they don't want to be judged by others, people to point at them and if you're not wearing a mask. But that's what they've done with the message they've been driving home now for 2 years. There's been 2 years of it. And they haven't, at this point, they don't need to speak about it anymore because the people will do it for them. They'll you're not wearing a mask. They'll judge people. People get judged for not being vaccinated by members of the public because of what the media and the government have done.
Yeah.
So,
well, I've seen that. I know of situations where a couple, husband and wife have been at each other because the husband is concerned about the kids being vaccinated as part of the government sort of extension of almost the mandate sort of thing, whereas the wife thinks they should be vaccinated, and that's created a bad situation for that couple. And my view is that it's a decision that they should make after talking to the family doctor. Going in position though is that we were told for 2 years that kids had very little to fear from COVID. Period. The whole vaccine mandate thing is quite outrageous. If you want to talk about that as well for a moment, I mean, it's just there has been for many decades a principle of informed consent where you, as an individual, if you're being advised about a medical treatment, you are meant to be treated in a certain way. You're entitled to seek alternative views. You shouldn't be forced, coerced, bullied into taking a treatment. You should have the medicos talking to you, properly explain the benefits and the potential risks. Well, mate, that's still up on government websites. If you go to last time I checked, if you go to the Victorian government website, it still talks about informed consent, and it's all there. You can Google it; it'll be there. But when it comes to COVID, just throw that stuff out the window. And it's wrong. And then to say to people, well, you can't earn a livelihood, you can't be a teacher, you can't be a police officer, you can't work for a major transport company or a major supermarket group. It's it. It's outrageous. And my position on it is, look, I've been vaccinated. My wife's been vaccinated. I had AstraZeneca. I can tell you now, I had 24 hours. It knocked me on the head, and I think there was some lingering effects, but generally fine. On the other hand, my wife, she's had some ongoing health impacts, which is unfortunate. She's okay, but it's important we do talk about these things, because I still would have had the shot, and she still would have had the shot, but I'm buggered if I should be forced to have additional shots, or I should have been forced in the first place. That was my decision. And I shouldn't be saying to you that you should have a shot. So another way to look at it is, if you said, hey, Cam, let's meet up and go and have a drink at such and such a pub, I don't care two hoots if you've been vaccinated or not. I have. I've got my protection. Why should I care if the person next to me sitting at the bar has had the shot or not? I mean, I think, what do I care? And the only argument they had for vaccine mandates was that, if you were vaccinated, you couldn't be then a carrier. Well, we know now, factually, that's not the case. You can carry. It's a vaccine that simply mitigates the impacts of the bug. It doesn't stop you passing it on. So at that point, there's absolutely no argument for the vaccine mandate, no logic whatsoever, and that's why it's so wrong. So we just want to quickly mention the Prime Minister. That's why I am so cranky with him, because he has said publicly he's against them, but then he stands back and he lets state premiers go ahead and force this on the community.
Let me make this clear. I just want to ask this question, make it very clear. If he wanted to right now, Scott Morrison, could he override vaccine mandates?
The answer to that is he at least should have a go. And I think he's got a number of mechanisms, Chris, where he could actually have a red hot go at shutting it down. There's several hooks he could use. One, of course, is dollars. And I've had it up to here with Morrison, because he hasn't shown leadership. He has not stood up and actually got the state premiers to give us consistent rules and regulations. It's all over the shop, as you know, as everyone knows. So what he should have said last year is, listen, ladies and gents, this is in November. We are opening this country up. We're in the room today. I want you to agree. We're going to debate this. It's not a dictatorship. We are going to debate what the rules and regulations should be, but we're going to walk out of this room with a set of agreed principles that are going to be adhered to. And one of them is, we're not going to have a vaccine mandate. And if you want to do your own thing, that's fine. But I'll then tell everybody that it's not okay, and I'm going to cut your funding on certain things.
Yeah.
So that's what he could have done. The other thing he could have done is, you don't want to open the border, West Australia, I'm going to take you to the High Court. Or he could have also said, I'm going to introduce legislation to the federal parliament using some of the human rights legislation Australia's already got, or international treaties we've signed, and actually use that power to actually force the states to open up or stop vaccine mandates. So there are a range of mechanisms, mate. And, just speaking about another party who tried to do it, Pauline Hanson and One Nation tried to wheel in legislation, and he squibbed it. He wouldn't support them. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. As you can tell, I'm pretty angry about it. He could have tried. He should have tried at the very least. At the very least, he should have had a go at it.
Yeah, and look, I don't think it'll hurt him in terms of, because you know what, if the people that want to get vaccinated will do it, whether there's mandates or not. And the people that don't want to, like myself, it doesn't matter whether there's mandates. Like, I lost my job over this back in September last year. That was a job that it's all I know. I was doing it for years. I spent a lot of time training and educating myself and trying to progress in the field. And it was, I work in mental health. So I worked in transitioning long-term mental health units, those patients back into the community.
Yeah.
And it was extremely rewarding. So it hurts in terms of, obviously financially it hurt, but also it took away something that fulfilled me, I guess,
Yeah.
from doing something that's important, very important. But that was taken from me just like that because of mandates. However, since then, I'm still in contact with a lot of my old employees. I was a manager there, so again, it was a big loss for me and my family. But I still talk to a few of the boys that I used to work with, and nearly all of them have caught it. Practically all of them, I think maybe except one or two, have caught COVID, and they're all vaccinated. Whereas there's me, who's not vaccinated, and I can't catch it if I tried. So, right, it's
Well,
so bizarre,
mate. I got a next door neighbour, literally just around the corner from me now here today, who is just around the corner. And his wife's just had the last 2 weeks. He's been right as rain. It's a weird bug. It certainly is.
Yeah.
But isn't it crazy what's happened inflicted upon you and other people because, at the end of the day, you're just one person, but there's another person there, and a nurse there, and a police officer there. And these people have been, like you, removed from helping people in the community. That's got to have an impact. I mean, I had, psychologists contacting me a couple of months ago when this all started to really go down, they couldn't work, counselling, 50, they might have 50, 60 patients who they're assisting. Some of those people may have had quite significant issues, and they suddenly, the person they trust who's providing that support can't deal with them anymore. And that's got to have an impact, and that's wrong. And that's the unintended consequences of this stuff just get glossed over all the time, mate. It's shocking.
It is shocking. And you know what? So during 2020 and 2021, before the mandates, I had the choice of whether to work or not to work. I could have done something else, and sort of I could have worked from home a lot more. But throughout 2020, 2021, unvaccinated, no one was vaccinated, obviously, I would still go into hospitals and work with these patients, and take that risk, knowing, and at the time, no one really knew what this thing, especially in 2020, no one knew how bad this thing was. I mean, we saw footage of people just dropping dead in the middle of Wuhan. We're thinking, shit, like, how bad is this thing, right? And yet people like myself still made that choice to go to work and still do our job, do our part. To then be told a year later that you no longer have the ability to perform your roles, which is what the notice said. It's hard to accept that, because it's like, well, hold on, what about last year when I was praised and celebrated for doing my job? Now all of a sudden I haven't got the ability to do that role. That was the worst part of it, I think, for myself, and I'm sure for many others. But it's not right. It's un-Australian. Absolutely. There's no place for mandates, especially vaccine mandates in this country. And to me, it seems like the federal government, they say one thing in terms of not wanting it, and there's no vaccine mandates, and Morrison doesn't support them, but the lack of action, or even a phone call to Dan or to Mark and say, listen, pull up, you're a bit overboard. Like, I'm sure, but there's, as far as I know, there's been none of that.
I mean, they are, make no mistake, that the premiers have been the villains as much as anyone has, but Morrison has been just missing in action. I mean, one of the big reasons, Chris, that I left the Liberal Party is because I see him and the parliamentarians around him. They stand for nothing, they deliver nothing. They don't believe in stuff. It's like I joined. The Liberal Party used to be, for example, about individual freedom. The freedom to choose these things, and the Liberal Party of even 10 to 20 years ago would the members of the party wouldn't have copped a situation where the Prime Minister stood by and did nothing. But now they're just a bunch of sheep that won't stand up and be counted, and he just won't rock the boat. By the way, I'll share this with you. I mean, I have talked to one of the federal MPs from Queensland in recent weeks, who basically says, well, related a conversation he'd had with the PM, and essentially, this guy reckons that the PM really is quite happy for there to be a mandate. It's literally a case of saying one thing, been quite happy to let the premiers go ahead and do it. You know,
Yeah, well,
so
absolutely, you can see that.
which is totally false. I mean, that's what I think now by his actions or his lack of action. Yeah.
His lack of actions, and he hasn't been like we can think back to the bushfires. Now everyone deserves a holiday, absolutely, no problem, but time and a place for that, and that sort of because before that I didn't mind him, he was all right, and then
Yeah.
over the years though he almost has removed himself from the picture. Like you rarely hear from him. The premiers have been leading it. Now he did when we first got the virus in Australia. He was handling the majority of it, which I think was a great thing because there was uniformity across all the states. Everyone was acting going in the one direction, and you could sort of get behind that to a certain extent because you didn't know much about the virus. So, but now, as the data's come out and the information's come out, he sort of, stepped away from it. And the premiers have been running it. Now, it seems to me that the worst are Anastasia up there in Queensland, Daniel Andrews in Victoria, and Mike McGowan. Mike McGowan he's very bad. He's very, very bad.
He and Daniel Andrews, I just think that the power trip these people are on, it's extraordinary. It's like, it is absolutely extraordinary, the things that have been inflicted on, the people in their state, but people, from outside the state who might be relatives or, people who need to go in there. I mean, they like to brag in his government, in the McGowan government, about, including him, of course, about how well they're doing because of iron ore. Well, there's a lot of iron ore miners who come from the eastern states who've had to be away from their families for long periods of time, and they couldn't get in and out properly because of the restrictions, and they've kept the wheels going for WA and for Australia, digging the stuff out of the ground and sticking on ships going overseas. But they have suffered a terrible price. They couldn't get back to see their loved ones.
Yeah, look, I think the approach that he's taking over there, Mike McGowan, is similar to the approach that every state took, which was lockdowns, restrictions on all different events you go to and social settings, then lift those restrictions, COVID takes over, put the restrictions back. That's what it's been like, but you can't stop it. Like what he's doing is just prolonging the problem. It's not going to go away. It's not going to give up and say, oh, you know what, he's very tough, that Mark, I'm going to back away. No, it doesn't work like that. At some point, they're going to have to open up. Yeah. At some point. And when that happens, the virus will not go away. Then it's going to start taking over. Because if you compare the cases in New South Wales, especially New South Wales and Victoria, to WA, a large part of the states on the East Coast have had they've had it. The population has gone through the population. People have got natural immunity to the virus and all the rest of it. So when it does take off over in Western Australia, because it will, they're going to have a massive headache.
There will be a catch up, and it is putting off the inevitable. I should say one thing then about looking forward as well. The LibDems position is, and we've been calling on for this prior to Christmas, so we've been talking about this for a while, but we reckon there should be a royal commission into the way this has been handled, where we get to look at everything. We get to look at the public health response, the way the restrictions, the border closures were handled, the role of the state premiers and the health officers. Particularly, I want to get in and find out about decisions about the vaccines and the interaction between bureaucrats, politicians, and the senior people in these drug companies, the deals that were done. They need to be really examined, what undertakings were given, and whether all the information that should have been released to the public has been released. So that's a big exercise. And, frankly, there's a few people I think ultimately should be in a lot of trouble about what's going on, but we won't know till we get into it. But that should happen. It just can't be sort of swept under the carpet and we just, let's just move on. I mean, we have really hurt this country. We've hurt people in business, and we have to get to the bottom of it.
there's been a lot of issues, and I think especially around health, in terms of the messages that we've received from the so-called health experts. So and I've known this for years. I'm sure a lot of people have known this, from very early on. And yesterday, not yesterday, but I shared it yesterday, a peer-reviewed study out of Israel, peer-reviewed study that showed that if you're vitamin D deficient, you're 14 times more likely to end up with a severe case of COVID, 14 times more likely. That's huge. But there's been no talk about that from the health experts. And in fact, what did they do? They decided to lock us inside our homes, out of the sun. Right?
Exactly.
So I mean, they've contributed. Well, they have. They've contributed.
Well, let's look at that, and just to look at what that might be, explaining as well, Chris, because it's like, you think about this. We have seen, when have we seen these waves, successive years in the Northern Hemisphere going into winter? Once the days are shortening, a Northern European winter, like in the UK and the like, United States as well, they've seen, it's my perception, there's been a big increase in cases in the winters. In Australia, where have we seen more issues? Victoria. Tasmania might be an exception because they were pretty well sealed off. They managed to keep it out. So I guess, maybe there's something there. But Victoria, particularly, a sort of far more fearsome winter, if I could put it that way. Whereas up here in Queensland, the sun's out, people are out and about. That very much could be the thing. So, I mean, of course, we get vitamin D naturally by being exposed to sunlight, as you were alluding before. So, it sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
It does make sense. And it's not just with COVID. I mean, it's all viruses that you get. You're talking the flu and just your common colds. If you were vitamin D deficient, you're going to have a much tougher time. We've known this for years. It's not new. And if I would have to imagine these health officials knew about it. There's been many studies that were done over the past 2 years, but the problem was that the minute someone would speak about those studies, the post would get removed for being misinformation.
Well, it's like this. Surely during this whole 2-year period, people, apart from all the stuff we've been talking about, the restrictions and the don'ts, there should have been some do's. And I cannot recall health officers or politicians standing up and saying, here's some advice on how to be in the best position to combat the disease. Sort of, we've not heard a lot about the preventative sort of stuff, in terms of the individual and what steps they can take to look after themselves.
Yeah, and even just general health. I mean, when we were locked down for a long time. And, a lot of elderly people who may have used to go to bingo or whatever they do during the weekdays were no longer able to do that. So they're sort of hibernating inside their homes. And, you would think that a health official would say, well, listen, even forget about the correlation between vitamin D and the severity of COVID, just in general. Just, hey, listen, remind everyone, because you're not in the sun and you're spending majority of time indoors, maybe look at, getting your blood test done, checking your levels, if not supplement with things like vitamin D, because you're probably not going to get it from being outdoors. Just, there was none of that. There was no talk about exercise. And in fact, they shut the gyms down, but they left open the bottle shops and tobacconists. And you start thinking, well, how can this be about health? It can't be.
Remember what I said before, mate, about lack of logic?
Yeah.
Mind you, I'm glad they didn't shut. I just want you to know, I'm glad they didn't shut the bottle shops.
Oh, I think a lot of people are. A lot of people are.
But I agree.
Yeah, you would think that if it's about health, that you would think that those, like, if you were sitting in a boardroom having that discussion, what's the first business being shut down? Tobacconists and bottle shops.
Yeah, and fast food takeaway was, that was all still hot to trot, wasn't it?
That's right, but alcohol usage increased dramatically, as did domestic violence, which is probably a combination of people being around each other a lot more in the home. and the fact that people were drinking more because they were bored. So when you add those two things together, it's a recipe for disaster. And not to mention that people were getting a lot more Uber Eats, delivery, takeaways from these fast food restaurants. So the overall health of our nation during the last 2 years, I can promise you, would have declined dramatically.
I think this, well, again, that's a case of this. They've looked at one dimension and they haven't looked at all these other things that happen. And you talked about your role in mental health. Well, that we know now that there's been an explosion of mental health problems across the country, particularly for the young. We know there's been an increase in suicides. We've seen figures for some of the states now, and it just really gets me that this was all foreseeable at the time. And I'm not being wise after then. Again, people like myself were talking about this from May, June 2020. We were talking about this in the mainstream media, so on Sky News, and you could see it, but that was all just the only thing we're about dealing with now is this one disease. It's just wrong.
Yeah, I seen an interview you did on Sky News with Andrew Bolt regarding something to do with. Hopefully, you can explain a little bit more because it was a bit of detail, but it wasn't, the full picture as to laptops or something getting deleted. The data of laptops getting deleted. There's
been a sort of a furor up here in the last 2 weeks in Queensland over integrity issues in government. So basically, that story is there was some allegations made that a particular person had been engaging in illegal lobbying. They weren't you have to be a registered lobbyist to actually lobby a minister in the government about decisions or whatever. The allegation was that somebody who had been was in the ALP had been taken money to lobby this particular minister. There was evidence supposedly on this laptop computer, and it was in the Integrity Commissioner, which is a job in Queensland that's meant to make sure that these things are run properly according to the law. And there was this evidence on a laptop. And what's happened is that people unknown, but from the Public Service Commission, have used their own swipe cards to get into the Integrity Commissioner's office, seize this laptop. It was taken away, and the potentially incriminating material was erased. Wow. So that's a cover up, and this is under the Palaszczuk government. But then there's been a whole lot of other things that have come out as well about, for example, ministers in the Palaszczuk government using their private emails to conduct official business. And just so you know, and your viewers know, basically what's that about? Well, that's about people trying to run around the freedom of information, or as they're called in Queensland, right to information laws. Anything that a politician does in terms of their official job, as opposed to party political stuff, everything they do is on the record. And the records that are generated are public records, and they are owned by the people of Queensland or the people, people of Victoria and New South Wales. You can't use your private email address appropriately to actually make decisions of government. And so these people have, there's no doubt about this, I'm not saying alleged, they have been doing it. And we're now finding out from some whistleblowers who are public servants saying, that they were coerced into trying to actually not adversely report about this stuff. So there's quite a cloud over the Palaszczuk government at the moment on these things.
I saw where she was getting questioned about that the other day, and she went red. She broke out this rash.
It was very interesting, wasn't it? Yeah.
Very interesting, because I've never seen her rattled like that. Not publicly anyway. I haven't seen her like that, and she was rattled.
Well, as you know, she was my political opponent, and some people might go, "Oh, this is just Newman and sour grapes." But I mean, the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, she hasn't really been given the same sort of treatment that I got when I was Premier. I was usually flambéed every press conference. That's the game. That's what it's about. So don't get me wrong, I'm not whinging about that. I'm just saying that's what she needs, that sort of scrutiny as well from the media. And it's only recently that she's been getting that from the mainstream media. The other thing she's done, mate, is that she loves to blame me. So she just goes, oh, but Campbell Newman did this or did that. And so I've actually issued a challenge to her, and in the last few days on social media, and I've said, look, if you want to refer to me, let's have a debate. Let's have a debate sometime in the next 4 weeks. Let's pick a place and time, and we can debate integrity, and we can debate the track record of our governments. And so I'll put it out, and she's not going to agree to it. But
No.
I'm a bit over it, Chris, about me being excuse number one. And I would be happy to really demonstrate to people that, she's full of it when she talks about some of these things. And she's got to do some explaining. So there it is. She can either debate me, or perhaps she might refrain in the future from talking about, things that happened sort of 7 to 10 years ago.
It's incredible up there. I mean, I'm pretty, I wouldn't say I'm lucky, because no one should be in this position anyway. So I'm not lucky here in New South Wales, but New South Wales seems to be not doing too bad in terms of, like, I can go and live my life practically as normal. There's not much difference in terms of what I can do to someone who's vaccinated can do. But in Queensland, I've got a few people I know up there and that aren't vaccinated. They're still stuck. Still. So I don't understand how this doesn't get called out, because we know now that look, if the vaccines were 98% effective, not even 100%, 98% effective at stopping someone from catching the virus, therefore spreading it, you could, I guess, make an argument, even though it's not right and it's still not compatible with this country. You could make an argument that it's necessary, but we know that that's far from reality.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it was like the other day I seen, who was it? Senator Rennick sent it to me, of the cases in New South Wales, and 99% of all the cases were fully vaccinated. 99% of cases. There's only 95% of people vaccinated. So you can see there that there's something going seriously wrong. But how they can still, segregate the people based on that vaccination status is completely illogical.
Yeah, it is.
And they ought to be called.
Yeah, you really put your finger on it. That is the pivotal issue. The logic is, you could mount a case, even though I don't think it's a good thing, but you could mount a case that, if vaccination stopped the spread, then, it's the greater good argument. That will actually kill the pandemic. But that's been proven to be wrong. It's blown out the window. So, like, why are we doing this? It comes down to then it comes back to individual choice, and it's wrong. And I get frustrated, being asked to show my papers, I won't use the app, by the way. So
good man.
I printed the stuff out. I carry it around my wallet. But you imagine, if we think about where we've come from, 2.5 years ago, the idea you'd front up to a cafe or restaurant and somebody would be asking you to show your papers before you can come in. I mean, give us a break.
You dismiss
it.
You wouldn't believe
and
it.
I try and be, on my best behaviour and polite to the people asking when I go in. But God, it gives me the shits. It really does. I mean, it's bad news. You'd like to lash out, but they're not the person to lash out to. But I mean, because they'll the next thing, they've got the police turning up on their doorstep, heavying them. If I was a serving police officer, I'd be just refusing to be involved in that sort of stuff. And this is where, by the way, mate, I'll have a go at a few. This is where a lot of the unions have been completely missing in action. They haven't stood up for their members. They haven't backed their members who want to, opt out. And it's appalling. And I just urge people who are union members, when the next union election comes around, why don't you have a look at the candidates next time around and work out who your friends were? It's an important thing. A lot of these people should be turfed out, because they have really sided with government, not with the employee.
Yeah, but listen, if they were to do that, I can't imagine that many police would be willing to participate in it, because I know a lot of police. I'm not joking. I've had hundreds of police officers message me privately who have told me that they hate it. They don't want any part of it. Some of them have resigned, and others have resigned after they've talked to me about it, or gone on leave for months at a time because I don't want any part of it. So if it was optional, that's the problem. If it was optional and the police got a say in whether or not they policed that or they didn't, they'd have no one out there going to businesses, because I can't imagine many of them would want to do it.
Here was my point, mate. To me, from my point of view, if I was a police officer, this is an issue worthy of a strike. Okay,
yeah, it is.
It's like, like, why has it just got to be about pay and conditions? If it's well, think about, probably Victoria is an easier one to talk about, because what happened in Victoria was so extreme, so un-Australian, so authoritarian, at times violent. Police officers should have walked. They should have gone on strike. It's just so wrong what's happened. I mean, we've seen the footage of the protester being thrown to the ground in Flinders Street Station. And that person was significantly injured. And
they're being charged now, I think.
Finally, that person's been charged, so we've got to see what the court process shows. But there's a lot of that went on. Look, I was in the army when I was a young fellow. I was in the army for about 13 years. And one of the things they teach you about at the very beginning is the role of the Australian Army in Australian society. And it's not there to be some tool of government to oppress the people. And there's this concept they teach you, Chris, which is called the concept of a lawful command. In other words, like, you might, people in the street might think, well, in the army, it's all about obeying orders, but they actually train you. So, well, if someone tells you to go down in a war zone to go and shoot that person, well, you have to weigh that up. You actually have to weigh that up. Yes, it's the battlefield, but you can't be told to shoot a prisoner who's sitting there offering no resistance. That's a war crime. You don't do that. So what I'm saying to you here, I'm using that as an example. If you go back to the police, arguably, some of the stuff that Victorian police were asked to do was bordering on the unlawful. Certainly it was against what the police service are meant to be doing, which is serving the community and protecting the community. Why is it okay, for example, to to stand back and have a Black Lives Matter protest, right? That's okay. But then a protest about freedom is worthy of pepper spray and rubber bullets and dragging people off. And then literally in the last 2 weeks, Daniel Andrews walked down the street for, basically, I'm not sure what the event's called, but essentially it was in celebration of gay and lesbian rights. That's fine. But this is the hypocrisy. I mean, I hooked into him, by the way, in social media. The hypocrisy of that. The guy only a few weeks ago was saying you can't protest.
Yeah, that's right. It was midsummer. Is that the one you're talking about? The midsummer event?
Yeah. So I hooked into on that. He's a hypocrite and he's an opportunist. He's a complete disgrace. That just shows. He showed no. He was talking about equality. He's showing no equality to people who don't wish to get vaccinated.
Yeah, that's what he's been banging on about now for the last week, especially with this religious discrimination. But what's your thoughts on that?
Honestly, and this is a bit unusual for yours truly, for those people who know me. I'm really confused now, and I don't know what I'd do. I'd have to actually look at the detail of this legislation. I really stress it. Normally, I'm pretty black and white. I know my own mind. On this one, it's got really confusing, and the chopping and changing and whatever. I mean, my personal view is I want people who have legitimate religious beliefs to not be in trouble and fall foul of anti-discrimination laws themselves and be able to practice their religion. But, I don't want to see someone kicked out of a school, for example, because they're gay. I have a real problem. I actually have a real problem with that. It goes back to what I said at the beginning. The party I'm in and my philosophy, it's libertarian. I don't want to tell people how to live their lives, and nor them tell me. And sort of, if the school I just mentioned, that hypothetical school, is getting government funding, and usually they are, well, that further reinforces my view. So it's a really difficult one. I guess at the end of the day, I'm just watching with interest about how this shapes up.
Because for me, it's think back to, I'm sure you remember the Israel Folau situation.
Yeah.
Where he made a post and he just shared, I think it was a verse from the Bible, which said something about gay people going to hell if they're sinning or whatever it was. Now, but he was destroyed over that.
Yeah.
Now, I don't necessarily think he should be punished for sharing his religious beliefs, because it wasn't him speaking about it. It was a religious text that he's literally just copied and pasted.
Yeah.
Now, if this religious discrimination bill was in play, would that have happened to him?
Yeah. Well,
That's
the question. We don't know what's going to come out of the sausage machine. And it's like this. I mean, how can I put this? I feel the same way about Israel Folau from the point of view. I think there was a pile on. I don't think he should have lost his career, etc. With the rugby union over it. But the way
it was unnecessary. He didn't need
maybe I'm sounding a bit old-fashioned. I thought he was being unnecessarily in the face of people in the gay community. I don't like. It's like when I was brought up, you just didn't say nasty things to people in public. That was being rude. We don't talk about people being rude anymore. But it was like it was in their face, and it was like, I felt like, mate, why don't you keep your views to yourself in terms of your church community, your religious community? Did you need to actually put it right out there and do that? Because he must have known. But at the end of the day, I defend his right to say whatever he damn well likes without sort of a big, without at the end of the day a pile on the thing. I just wish people would show respect for one another. He should have shown respect to people who have a different view, and people should have. But he's entitled to say what he likes, even if I think it was over the top.
Yeah, and I think we're losing that a little bit in terms of where I have no problem with anyone's opinions, views, or beliefs, but it's when you target an individual based on that. That's where I sort of think, well, you don't need to do that. You're just being a shit person. There's no need to do that. But there's a very fine line between that and also killing freedom of speech.
Oh, well, that's where we are now. You mentioned Rogan earlier on. I mean, that's where we're going. And, I think what's happening there is outrageous. I mean,
it is outrageous. The guy, think about it. If he said the N-word, he probably shouldn't have said that, but there's a big difference between him saying it in the context in which he was really just repeating jokes and talking about titles and lyrics or whatever he was talking about. There's people out there who genuinely don't like black people, who want to hurt them. There's people.
And that, mate, that is racism, as opposed to talking about, stuff. I've seen nothing to suggest the guy's a racist.
No, nothing at all.
So why is he being treated? Why is he being treated like he is? And as for take Spotify. I mean, well, it seems there's a bit of a revolt internally with their staff. Well, I mean, grow up, you mob. Don't be so precious. Okay, we could go and like, do they? Okay, like Eminem. Eminem is on, his music is on Spotify. I know because I listen to it on Spotify. Yeah. Well, some of his lyrics are pretty confrontational, and in another time and place, another era, he wouldn't even, they used to bleep that stuff out on the radio.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do the Spotify crew think about some of Eminem's lyrics? Like, it's like you just can't. You just got to roll with it. You don't get to like everything what people say. And I think the important thing is that people who don't want to listen to someone like Rogan on Spotify, they don't have to.
It's
exactly entirely voluntary.
Yeah,
don't listen to him.
Yeah, one of the things that happened to me, it's the funniest thing. It gets me every time, is that when I'll post something, whether it be Instagram, Twitter, whatever, I'll share something. And people take it personally. It's like, I'm sharing something. I don't even know who you are. I've no idea you exist until you popped up and commented that it's offensive to you. I was talking about an issue in general, and you've, for some reason, taken offense to what I've said and said it like it was directed at you. Don't follow me. Don't read it. Block me. I don't care. But why would you take what I say personally? There's thousands of people that follow me. Why would I be talking about you in particular?
Well, going back to what you were asking about Folau earlier on, the problem that has arisen is really probably comes from this, the federal anti-discrimination legislation, the so-called 18C, which talks about, essentially offending people. And there's other bits in there. And my position is that, offence is just too loose. It really is. If I'm saying something that encourages people to hate Black people or Asians and suggest that we should visit violence on them or exclude them from employment or a role in this country, that's too far. But if I'm expressing a negative view about them, in my view, that's not too far. That's, yes, they've got every right to be offended, but should it be a breach of the law? Well, I don't think so. And that's where the Folau stuff came. I mean, again, to be crystal clear, I just think that's, if someone's doing that to me is offensive. But I mean, I don't feel that I should, and society should be, the law should be coming down on them and shutting them down. I mean, if people say dumb stuff, offensive stuff, that's going to happen. By the way, I mean, as a former politician, and maybe you want to be in it again, people post stuff that's really offensive about me, and I don't curl up a little ball and have a big sook about it. I just got to wear that. So just interesting. It's okay for people to post stuff against all political figures that is quite offensive, but they've got to roll with it. But do you see what I'm saying? There's double standards here as well. But look, what the LibDems are saying in this Freedom Manifesto is our policy on this whole stuff is we want a constitutional amendment. So the Australian Constitution should be changed to have a clause there that guarantees free speech and the right to political discourse, etc. So we're suggesting that unashamedly we should go to a copy and paste from the American Constitution and whack it in ours. And the courts can then sort out the interpretation of that locally. But I think the important thing is during this pandemic, you'd agree, I'm sure, that a lot of the American states have not bought into the COVID nonsense. They've allowed life to go on. They haven't restricted people's freedoms in the same way. And, that's why we're suggesting that we go that way as well. So a lot of these things are tied into one another. Like that woman who got dragged off, the pregnant woman in Victoria got dragged off for organising a protest. That's where, that's where free speech was being curtailed.
Absolutely. And it's wrong. And it's almost like you forget you live in a free country at times with the past 2 years. It doesn't seem that way, but it's,
Chris, what's good's an Australian passport? Thank you, Scott Morrison. Yeah. Well, are they all, by the way, are they going to renew our passports for free? We've had passports haven't been able to use for 2 years. Are they going to give us a discount?
I'd hope so. I didn't think of that.
I think we can dream on, mate. That's not going to happen.
It's this whole situation, man. It's crazy. And look, I mean, so was it the Freedom Manifesto, and it's on
Freedom Manifesto, mate? Yeah, it's on ldp.org.au/freedom. So we talk about a few things in this. There's various sections in it. Basically, we talk about freedom from COVID alarmism and what our policies would be there. We're talking about a thing called recall elections, where if enough people sign a petition, we can actually force, say, the federal government or the state governments to actually go to an election. So they have a recall election in some American states like California. Debt and deficit. We believe that what we're doing is we're incurring a massive amount of debt for future generations, which will hurt ultimately, and we've got to stop the crazy wasteful spending. We're talking about low, flat, simple taxes. So the tax rate's only 20%. and the tax-free threshold's 40 grand. And we're saying you should get your money. It shouldn't be taken off you at a high tax rate, put through the washing machine of government and given back to people in terms of allowances and things like that.
Yep.
We're saying superannuation should be voluntary. So right now, 10% of your money is basically taken by your employer and paid into a super fund. You should get that money and make decisions about your own financial future. There's a whole lot about small business. We're talking about cheap and reliable energy. I back nuclear power, by the way. We back nuclear power. And if I get into the Senate, I'm going to actually put in a private member's bill to try and get the ban on nuclear power overturned. We're saying a whole lot about education. We're saying parents should get a voucher, a funding voucher for their kids' education, and then they should be able to choose whatever school they want to go to.
Yep.
And that would actually really sort out some of the problems in the education system. There's stuff about freedom, free speech, and there's also a section on the way we've now got really a surveillance state in Australia. So, I mean, as you know, we've had all these check-in apps, but there's been some legislation that's been put in that is quite scary, where the police and intelligence agencies can hack in to Australian social media, change stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and it's done without a warrant from a judge. It has to go, goes to someone at the Australian Administrative Appeals Tribunal. They can sign off on them doing that. It's just outrageous. It's akin to a phone tap, really.
Well, they can even send emails and shit from you. They can send emails to whoever they want from your account.
Oh yeah, they can really get in, and they can basically, I assume, as some part of some sting operation. So of course, these things are always justified on the basis that we're going to go after pedophiles and organised crime and all this sort of stuff. But then they get misused. They do get misused, and this should never have been put through by a Liberal government.
What's your thoughts on the digital ID bill?
Oh, look, I think that's pretty odious as well. I'm totally against that. And I mean, I'm a director of a number of companies in business, and so I've now got a director ID number. Again, a coalition government brought that in. So. By the way, one thing I should probably deal with, for people in Queensland who, sort of are concerned about what I did when I was Premier and I took on criminal motorcycle gangs. There was these laws I brought in, which were called the VLAD laws. And often people say to me, well, how do we believe you and trust you, Campbell Newman? You brought in these laws that were very oppressive and were used the wrong way by police.
Speak about those laws. I'm not familiar with them. So what exactly?
Okay, well, basically what happened was, the background to it, Chris, is that there was an incident while I was Premier where there was basically a huge fight, basically a riot between two rival motorcycle gangs on a Saturday night on the Gold Coast in a public place, in a restaurant. They're throwing chairs and tables. It was very violent. The police came down. There was violence there as well. People were arrested, gang members were arrested. They then turned up to the cop shop and demanded that their comrades be let out. Anyway, the place went nuts. And so there was real pressure on me to do something about it. And so we brought in some pretty tough laws, which were called the VLAD laws, VLAD. And, people at the time were quite concerned about that. And often, as I said, I get people going, well, hang on, how can you say you're against the digital ID thing or surveillance or whatever? How can we trust you? And I say this, look, I had to act. The laws had sunset clauses in them, but you know what? I'm prepared to concede today that if I had my time again, I don't think I'd have done it. What I would have done is I said to the police, use the laws you've got. They're more than sufficient. Because I think what I've understood in the last 7 years, particularly looking back at that time and then seeing what's happening in Australia today, is that if you give too much power to the police, or indeed public servants, health bureaucrats, they will take it and they will misuse it. And I do concede that, probably the police in Queensland were pulling over people who just enjoyed motorcycle riding and whatever. Look, the intent was correct. It was right. But I really get these days that, it was a step too far. So I guess I regret that. I don't regret going after criminal gangs. Don't regret that at all. And, I'd certainly do that if I had my time again. But I don't I don't think those laws were needed. We could have done it in other ways. So I hope people understand that. I've certainly got a reputation actually as being authoritarian, but I've got to live with that. But I really am someone who's always been very anti new laws. That's on the public record as well. Whatever people used to say to me, why don't we crack down on this, and we should crack down that, and you should legislate for that. Look, we've got enough laws in this country. There's enough laws to tie people up in red tape and bureaucracy and set people against one another. We don't need any more. We need to be sensible about this.
Yeah, but it speaks to your character for admitting, I guess, as you said, in hindsight, that you may have got that one wrong. But as you said, the intent was good. There's obviously pressure on you at the time to make a decision, to make a move, seeing as to what happened. But shit happens. We learn, we make mistakes, and I'm sure you.
Yeah, well, it was. Yeah, again, it was the right thing to do to go after the gangs. That absolutely had to happen. But did we need these new laws? I actually reflect we didn't, and there was plenty of stuff that we could have gone after them on. It's just the police needed to be given, a rev up to go after the gangs. That was that's what was needed.
Is that law still in place today?
No, they're not. The Labor Party came in and repealed them anyway, mate. But
okay.
But the thing that's often lost is they had to be renewed. There were sunset clauses on aspects of them as well. So it's like we certainly at the time were conscious that they weren't laws that how can I put this? Well, there were laws that we didn't really want to see in the long term anyway. There are certainly aspects of them.
Yeah, just short term to get whatever it was under control. And
the lesson for me is that police will always, and police, intelligence agencies, and bureaucrats will always ask for more power. And my learning out of it is you don't have to give it to them. And what we've seen in the last 2 years, for me, really reinforces why you don't give it to them.
And I think it could be a little bit of laziness on their part, where instead of working harder and doubling down, they'd rather just get something passed to help them, I guess, a different tool to use to make their lives a little bit easier as well. But that's...
Yeah, well, what I saw the Victorian Police, I really raised that for a reason. What the Victorian Police showed us, particularly last year, was what happens when an organisation is given too much power and the politicians just sort of let them go. They just acted brutally towards the community as authoritarian thugs. So that's pretty strong. Remember, I'm a former premier. People see me in a certain way, but I've been incredibly critical of the Victorian Police, and I always supported the police in Queensland. I was a big supporter of their role, and I've always had respect for them. But I hold the hierarchy, the top people in the Victorian Police, in contempt, mate. I cannot mince words. I won't mince words. They are a disgrace to what they've done and the way they've done the political dirty work for a person who shouldn't be the premier.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an embarrassment. I mean, that was the footage from those scenes, of the rubber bullets and the train station incident, that went worldwide. But that footage went around the world, and people were speaking about. Joe Rogan was even speaking about what was happening down in Victoria. So it was a really bad look for the country. But what damage has that done, though? We've got to think about that. What damage has that done to the trust that the Victorian people have in the police at this point, especially the children? Like, the kids saw that in the news, and what are they going to be like? Are they going to have the same level of trust that we had in the police? Because I can't imagine it's a good thing.
No, it's a bad thing, and fair-minded, free-thinking police officers, and I'm sure there's many in the Victorian Police, don't get me wrong, but they would tell you that. They would tell you that for sure. There's a lady named Crystal she's our Senate candidate. She's number 2 on the ticket in Victoria for the Senate, and she's former police sergeant, and she took a principled stand. She left because she just couldn't do what she was being asked to do anymore, and good on it.
I think I've seen that interview with her. There was another gentleman as well down there that was speaking at one of the rallies. I can't think of his name.
David Limbrick, it might have been. So he's our lead Senate candidate. He's a member of the Victorian Parliament for the Liberal Democrats. Okay. Yeah, so he's been at the forefront of,
his speech was very moving. Even to me watching it, it had that other element in there because he was taking responsibility for the actions of the police and saying that we've been betrayed, or I've betrayed the people of Victoria. It was a powerful speech.
Another person,
yeah. It was a powerful speech, and it was something where it's different to hear that from a figure like himself. I can't remember his name. Wish I could remember his name. But incredible. If I see it, I'll send it to you. But it was such an incredible. It was actually part of the documentary Battleground Melbourne.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think it was one of the first people that spoke in front of the camera. Yeah, it was incredible. But listen, I'm looking at the time because of where you have to take off. But anything you wanted to end with?
Oh, I guess if you'll indulge me, just to be blatantly political for a sec, I've told my story. I've left the Liberal National Party. I joined the Liberal Democrats. I'm disgusted in the major parties, what they've done across Australia in the last 2 years. And I just say to people that there's an election coming up. And I just urge people to really think long and hard about their choices. If we keep doing the same thing, we'll get the same result. And I'd urge people to please, I'd like you to have a look at the Liberal Democrats, look at the people if you're in New South Wales, there's John Ruddock, who's standing for the Senate, David Limbrick, Crystal and Caroline, who are in Victoria. I've got Tegan as my running mate up here. Canelm in Tonkin in South Australia. So there's some great people running for the Senate. In some seats, we are running lower house candidates. So I'd ask people to look at us, look at the Freedom Manifesto. But you know what, if we're not your cup of tea, look at the other minor parties. And my final thought, Chris, is put the major parties last, and you decide how you're going to allocate your preference votes. The parties make recommendations, but you get to decide. And, that's the way you'll get change. Think carefully about your decisions. So please, we'd love you to vote for us. If you can't vote for us, certainly look at the other minors and don't give those major parties the benefit of a high batting order vote, if I can call it that. And so that was my final word, mate. And look, I really appreciate being on your show. So thank you so much for having me. And
it's a pleasure.
You come on in the future if you want to hit me with some tough questions about something.
Well, you're welcome back whenever. And look, I think this is we're in a very crucial time for Australia's future as to what's going to happen to this country. I think now is the time. I think this is a time where we will look back in decades to come and think that election is where either the reason why we're living as free as we are today, or the reason, unfortunately, if it goes to the major parties, because I can't see them changing their stance on a number of issues. So, it could be the reason why our children are living the way they live, under sort of a police state in some aspect. And I really do think this is a moment that we'll look back at. I really do. It's crucial. This next election is very crucial. Now, I'm very mutual to. I said, I'll have you on, I'll have Malcolm Roberts on, I'll have whoever, it doesn't bother. I'll have Daniel Andrews on tomorrow, it doesn't bother me. But it's very important that people look at and think about the future. Remember the past, but you got to think more towards the future, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a crucial election, mate. So thank you